The battle for Soledar is raging. Have Ukrainian forces held the Russians at bay? What exactly is Prigozhin doing in a salt mine? I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. It is January 11th, 2023. This is your daily Ukraine update. Let's get into it. Okay, first, let's take a look at the control map. This is actually fairly updated, and we'll zoom it out. We'll focus on Bakhmut. And as you guys can see, let's take a look, right? The only major changes to the front lines is actually just a repositioning. You guys can see here first, this reports that while Russian forces still do not control the rail yard, this does show them as having seized about 2 city blocks in central Soledar. You also have a readjustment of the Russian front lines. You can see they withdraw. It depicts them as withdrawing a bit here and being a bit more advanced here in the west. I don't think this is meaningful. There's not really meaningful terrain. I think this is just an adjustment reflecting a improved data over the last 24 hours. Now, when we look at the combat map, this is where things also become sort of interesting. You can see that, of course, Ukrainian Ministry of Defense has actually reported that there's just heavy continuous clashes in Soledar. This is seen as a heavily contested battlefield. You can see this control map actually does have Russian forces controlling the rail yard and a significant portion in the south here, but it doesn't have them controlling the city blocks right here. So once again, this is evidence of just how hard and fast this combat in Soledar has gone. What the Ukrainian forces are almost certainly trying to do is engage in a block, right, and to disrupt the momentum of the Russian forces. Like we've seen in the Kharkiv offensive, right? You guys, that is an example of what happens when you achieve a breakthrough correctly. They broke, Ukrainian forces, this was months ago, broke through, I believe it was up around, I think it was right around here, and they achieved this breakthrough, and then they began to push towards Kupiansk, breaking out in different directions, creating chaos in the backfield. And Russia struggled to respond because by the time they would figure out where Ukrainian forces were, they would already have advanced. And it made it really hard to allocate resources, to allocate troops to any defensive positions because Russia simply had no idea where the Ukrainians were as they broke through the lines. And that's the power of momentum. Once you start achieving gains, it can become easier, actually, right? The balance of forces, right? Generally, the rule is, at least in NATO doctrine, that you have 3 times as many attackers as defenders because it's really hard to dislodge attackers or defenders. But that rule isn't universal. If you can dislodge defenders, then the attack element doesn't necessarily need a numerical advantage to conduct what's called exploitation, which is continuously exploiting a hole you've made in the front. The attacker actually gains the advantage as they create chaos for the defender, but only once they've broken the defenders. So this is sort of the idea of momentum, right? An object in motion is going to stay in motion, just like an attack that has achieved a breakthrough is actually likely to continue to press and seize territory. So what Ukraine needs to do is just slow and stop this Russian movement in Soledar. And I think that seems to be what they are trying to do. Take this offensive by the Russians and grind it down to a virtual halt. This is, of course, a proven strategy as they've done the exact same thing in Bakhmut. You guys can see Russia still trying to advance into Bakhmut through the east and enjoying literally no success. When we look in the south here, you guys can see that this still shows Russian control of these 2 city blocks, but this is, again, the sort of meat grinder that we were expecting to see, where every square inch is paid for many times over with casualties on the Russian side. Certainly, the Ukrainians are also taking casualties. But like we said, if you attack and you don't achieve that breakthrough, there's a reason they say you need 3 times as many attackers, because casualty rates can get high, especially if you don't successfully break those defensive lines. You can see War Mapper doesn't even have the Russians controlling those city blocks. It lists them as actually still Ukrainian controlled. Though I'm trying to see here in Soledar, it's much more vague. They're willing to assess a larger Russian presence in Soledar, but not list it as being Russian controlled. You can see the Russian control line is actually outside, just on the outskirts of Soledar proper. So all this to say, well, what does it mean for Russia? Well, I think Russia knows it needs very badly to break Ukrainian lines. And that's why we actually see photos like this. Now, you may be like, hey, who is this old overweight guy? That is actually not a random... This is in fact a prisoner, a former prisoner who is with Wagner Group, but he is actually the head of Wagner Group, Yevgeny Prigozhin. And yes, he is in fact a former convict born in the Soviet Union, and he is the head financier of Wagner. And what's fascinating is that he has been very quiet over the last couple of weeks as Russians, particularly his Wagner Group mercenaries, have been basically humiliated in Bakhmut, right? Continual attacks, no territory gained. But now that they are winning, just like your dirtbag friend from high school, once you've achieved a level of success, all of a sudden they want you to remember that we've always been best friends. And Prigozhin's here, right, posing with other guys from the Wagner Group in the Soledar salt mines in an effort to probably... There's 2 interpretations. The good interpretation is in order to rally the troops and show that he's here in it with them, which, to his credit, is kind of a Chad move for a civilian to get geared up. You can see he's got, though unlike the Wagner Group guys, he's got proper gear. Get geared up and come out to the Soledar salt mines, which is no joke. Like the Soledar, let's see if we can find the salt mines here. This is not that distant. I think this is the salt mine. So you can see he's like 3 kilometers from the heaviest fighting. It's no joke. So, you know, that's the generous interpretation. The non-generous interpretation is, like we've talked about, that Prigozhin wants to carve out a loyalist demographic among ultra-nationalist Russians. And ultra-nationalist Russians want a strong military, and they want their country led by a strong, brave, fearless leader who is a real alpha man. Like, basically they want Andrew Tate to run their country. And Prigozhin, by playing dress up and going to the Soledar salt mines, gets to make some pictures and appear to be this type of alpha male Billy Badass. Now, I want to point out some details that you may have missed. The first is that he has a GoPro. You may have noticed in this conflict, it is extremely common. The number of times I've seen GoPro footage depicting other soldiers with GoPros tells us that single-handedly this conflict is sustaining GoPro's falling stock price. And I'll admit, it is both very cool to have this POV footage of your combat operations. I actually think it would be so sick to have GoPro footage of even just routine stuff from my combat deployment. But Prigozhin is not going to go into combat, right? He's not going to be shooting Ukrainians. So what he needs a GoPro for is not clear. Though what other soldiers will often, I believe, use GoPros for is actually intel gathering. You know, you will give GoPros to like your reconnaissance group, and then you can go out, do your recon mission, come back, and then hand the actual point POV footage of your recon mission to your Intel section, to your Intel shop, and they can literally do analysis right there in real time, watching the very thing that you saw, right? So if you got it wrong and you said, hey, there's 3 BMPs, but really they were Bradleys or something, maybe the Intel guys can discern that. So there is real value in having a GoPro, but not when you're Prigozhin, right? The other thing is that, of course, he has mags and he has a Krinkov, an AK-74. He also has, I want to point out, a proper, it looks like an IOTV or a ballistic plate vest. And look carefully. You can see his boots are actually looking in pretty good shape, as is his uniform. You notice his uniform top and bottom are like the same. They're equally worn, or in this case, equally not worn. You also have his buddy here, who I want to point out that looks like he's got maybe it looks like this could actually be an M4 or an M16 series rifle, but it may be, I don't know. It may be this buttstock and this handguard, and it looks like this could be the front sight post of an M4 or M16, which is fascinating. But notice how his uniforms are also really, really intact. And he also has this brand spanking new plate carrier with no patches. Now, and of course, his boots, you can't really see, but they're also looking pretty good. I think this is Prigozhin. I think this is like his chief of staff or some other like general type. And then I think this dude is an actual Wagner mercenary. I say this because 1, his boots are a hot mess. 2, his pants are super fucked up. But he's got this jacket that's clearly like way newer. Also, his rifle has the like buttstock pad. Everything about this just looks like it's seen some stuff. But also want to point out that Prigozhin, the chef, gets high-end body armor and a Kevlar. This dude doesn't even have a place to put his mags. Literally, this dude looks like he's sticking his magazines in his pocket. Same with this dude. Same with all these guys, actually. They have no helmets. The only helmets in this shot are Prigozhin and his buddy. And then all these other dudes, no helmets. Doesn't even look like there's body armor. This dude has no tactical vest. This guy's wearing galoshes, which actually is probably the boots that you want in this sort of combat zone. But I just want to draw the contrast between what are clearly the two people here for show and the crew that does the actual work in the mines. Just could not be more vastly different, and telling that even a propaganda picture still can't really create the fiction that these guys have real proper body armor and gear. Anyway, that is all I had for you guys for today. Certainly a dramatic update. But of course, if you want access to the uncensored combat video breakdowns, and this week is going to be just all Soledar. A new video drops Friday, and we're going to be looking at all the viral footage from Soledar, the kind that, I can't show you on YouTube, right? That's going to be checked out. We are going to do all of it. The link is in the description, so sign up for the Patreon. New video drops every week. And of course, thanks to our Lieutenant tier patrons. You guys are the ones who are really carrying this forward. I'll see you all in the next one.